Hello, welcome to the Healthy Alternatives podcast. I am Dr. Christine Sauer with DocChristine.com. Today's show is a recording of my radio show of the same name. Enjoy! Good afternoon, this is Dr. Christine Sauer, your host of the show Healthy Alternatives, here on 97.5 CIOE-FM, with live stream on communityradio.ca every Thursday at 12 noon Atlantic Standard Time. Thanks for tuning in today. In this show, I will talk, mostly with guests, about all aspects of health, healthcare and wellness, from conventional to alternative and everything in between. My mission for this radio show is to help change people's lives for the better by informing them about different options to get and stay healthy and well, so they can choose for themselves which option might be working in their case. And if you feel you are stuck in a dark place, I want to tell you, don't give up. There is a light at the end of the tunnel for you too. Today, I'm extremely pleased to be with Stefanie Davis Miller. She's a paramedic and an advocate for first responder mental health. Thank you so much for being on the show, Stefanie.
Thank you for having me today.
It's a real pleasure to have you on the show, and I know you have a story that you can tell people about how you, as a paramedic, started to become an advocate for first responder mental health.
Sure. I come from a family of first responders. So before I was a paramedic, my father was a police officer for 32 years, and my first husband was also a police officer. The mental health component comes in when I was a teenager, 17 years old. I was involved in 3 traumatic events back to back, and subsequently developed PTSD. I didn't know I had PTSD, so I suffered in silence for 7 years. But when that was finally diagnosed and, kind of worked through, I really recognized that, wow, there's so many people out there that don't know, what the signs and symptoms are or that something is maybe not right in their life or where to get help. And so bringing kind of all of those things together, I wanted to find a way to be able to advocate and help others so that people don't have to suffer in silence or feel so alone when they're struggling.
No, that is really interesting. Let me ask you, when that happened at 17, were you already a first responder yourself, or were you just involved in those events?
No, that's the thing. I was not a first responder. And, it's important to recognize that PTSD happens to anyone, can happen to anyone at any time. So actually, when I was involved initially with those events and my diagnosis, I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I was just a civilian, just a normal person. At the time, I was just the daughter of a police officer. And so now being on the job and exposed to the traumas that we see, I have a new and improved diagnosis of complex PTSD.
Let me ask you, you say that it wasn't recognized and you didn't even know yourself that you had PTSD. What were the first symptoms that maybe somebody that is listening and had traumatic events that they thought they were over, maybe they are not, maybe they're having those symptoms and just don't recognize it?
Absolutely. The first and probably biggest, there's a number, but the sense of feeling alone, the sense of feeling that I was the only person, that these horrible things had ever happened to, and feeling that just I couldn't relate to people and that no one understood me. So no matter what, if people tried to help or whatever, I can remember saying, well, you just don't understand. And besides that, profound sadness. I got to a point where I was just numb. Before kind of that numb point, very angry, right? And so where does anger come from? Well, it comes from hurt. It comes from, grieving or whatever that might have been. I would go from 0 to 100, at the snap of the fingers, where things were fine and one little thing would, upset me. And, just this uncontrollable rage would take over. And I didn't know any different. I just
would you say that is relatively typical for PTSD, that sudden anger and uncontrollable anger that comes out of nowhere?
I think, honestly, that it's different for each individual because your experience with PTSD and what's triggered you or put you into that spot, is different for everyone, and their perceptions are different. Some people might just be sad or numb. But yeah, I would think that a lot of people probably do get mad. They probably don't have a high tolerance for, much of anything because you're always on edge. You're always on high alert. And so part of that is that agitation. And with that, I believe, would come the anger as well.
Yeah, and I know that many people that go in war zones experience PTSD as well. And I know years ago it was called shell shock. And they were told, oh, just get over it. But I know from personal experience, actually, with my grandfather, who had to serve in the Second World War on the German side, sadly, he came home a changed person. And that happened to many people that came back from the war. And nowadays we know it's PTSD, and there's lots of help for it. And I would love to talk a little bit more about that, how PTSD comes along, why somebody gets PTSD and others don't.
Sure. So absolutely, with your grandfather being exposed to, kind of that war issue, absolutely. So PTSD basically stems from, there's a number of criteria that's listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, Volume 5, or people call it DSM-5. That's a tool that mental health professionals will use sometimes to help diagnose a certain condition. So within that, the person, again, there's a number of them. Forgive me if I miss some, but exposed to a severely traumatic event in which they felt feared for their lives. It could be an event where they saw, a friend, a coworker, or even someone they didn't know lose their life in a very, kind of violent or traumatic way. Nowadays, they're also suggesting that people that learn of a traumatic event that has happened to someone close to them, there can be vicarious trauma. So someone telling you an extremely traumatic event. Now, that's a little bit different. I think that might be a stretch, to be honest with you, that one. Sexual assault. So again, that violation. One of the main components with PTSD when the person's exposed to whatever's going on is the sense of helplessness. That no matter what that person does, they can't change the outcome. They can't stop what's happening. And so that really kind of takes over and really, kind of works on your psyche there, just making you feel like there's just nothing you can do. So powerlessness, vulnerability, those kind of things. But it has to be a very severe kind of exposure to one of those types of events.
Yeah.
And then within that, there's a number of criteria. If you look in the DSM, there's A, B, C, D, and E, and you have to have certain
the
things.
DSM is very complex. It's a very big manual. And sometimes it's just to put a label on something. But sometimes it's really helpful to know that it actually is a consequence of something and not just something that you imagine in your head, and that is something that you just have to get over it and nothing serious. It is serious.
Yeah, absolutely. In 2000, when they told me I had PTSD, I had no idea what PTSD was. But just like you said, I felt so thankful. I felt hopeful because I thought, wow, okay, maybe there really is something wrong with me, but you know what's wrong with me, and now we can start to work on it. So,
now,
you're right.
Let's just spend a few minutes on it. I have the question, why somebody that, say, two people experience the same traumatic event, why does one person get PTSD, the other one not? Is there anything that predisposes people?
There are a few studies that suggest exposure to various events while you're a child can potentially make you more susceptible. However, as much as you're right, PTSD has been around for years, battle fatigue, shell shock, and the list goes on and on. Even in the 1800s, there's listings and documents about it. These things are based on, how that person was brought up. So, and what types of exposures they, experienced as a child. So some of the things that potentially, according to this one study, could put you at more risk of these adverse events would be, even something as simple as divorce in the family, loss of a parent, loss of a sibling, again, a sexual assault, and an abusive home or abusive background. So those are a few things that could but it's not black and white. It's actually very gray.
It is a very difficult way to be. Many people have those experiences, and many people have PTSD, and it's still not widely recognized. They say, oh, well, you just have to get over it. And that is not helpful in any mental illness.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I do PTSD now for myself. If you can picture, I'm a visual person, so if you can picture drawing a picture of an umbrella, and if you write the word PTSD in that umbrella, but then underneath that umbrella are all of these little strings, if you wish, and those strings, on each string, things would be written down. Depression would be one. Anxiety might be another. Maybe some sort of an addiction to whether it be alcohol, drugs, gambling, spending money. All of those things are basically PTSD. You're right. It's just an umbrella term. It's just something, okay, you have PTSD, but it's different for everyone. And so those things affect people differently.
It's certainly a very important part of life, because here in Canada and in the US too, wherever they listen to that podcast, and the same in Europe, we send people in crisis areas where things happen that are unthinkable here. I mean, who here sees somebody being beheaded in front of them? That must be so traumatic.
Absolutely. And I think that's... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. And I know soldiers that came back with PTSD. I know first responder that had PTSD after they saw a child burning up alive or something very extensive like that. And you probably saw very traumatic scenes as a paramedic. And I remember when I worked in Germany as a doctor, we went as first responders too. And I've seen some quite horrible things. And it's hard to deal with it, isn't it?
It's very difficult. The scary thing is that when people hear PTSD, they think it's a life sentence. Some people think that means that their life is over. And, it is difficult. I do not believe that you can get rid of PTSD. But what I do believe is that if you take a lot of, hard work, really dedicated time, working through the different things that are troubling you, trying a whole bunch of different modalities, exactly what your show is all about, different modalities for different people. I believe that you can continue on, with your life, and you can get back to that, healthy, contributing, person in society. It's not the end of the world.
That is wonderful to leave us for the first half of the show with. And after the commercial break, we will talking more about PTSD and what can be done to deal with it, to help to live with it in a constructive way and maybe still contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello and welcome back to Healthy Alternatives here on 97.5 CIOE FM or on the web at communityradio.ca. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Sauer, and today I'm talking with Stefanie Davis Miller, a paramedic and advocate for first responder mental health. And in the first half, Stefanie, we talked about PTSD, what it means to the person. Now let's talk a little bit about what you can do if you went through a traumatic event. Is there anything that you can do to prevent getting PTSD?
I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know that you can prevent PTSD.
I mean,
but I think...
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that education is power. And I think if we can educate, so my goal, what I do is work to speak with first responders, but it goes for anyone. If we can educate people as to, what is PTSD? what is depression, what is anxiety, and make people aware of what these things are, what the signs and symptoms are, and ways we can kind of help ourselves. I always recommend, a 6-month wellness check to go in and speak with a therapist, even if nothing's wrong, just to check in, just to make sure things are, on the up and up. Find someone to talk to before you're in crisis. So that when you're in crisis, you have someone that knows you, the basics, like, I'm married, I have 2 dogs, I have 2 kids, that kind of information. So that when you're in crisis, you can get down to the meat and potatoes of what's going on, and they have a background on you and may have some sort of an idea how to help you better, or some sort of an idea as to why the situation impacted you the way you did, because of maybe your past history or whatnot. So I think, education, I think, being aware that mental health is just as important as our physical health.
Right.
We go to see the doctor
together.
once a year, we see the dentist. It's the same thing.
It all goes together. I always compare that the 3 parts of us, the body, the mind, and the spirit, and we have to have it all together or it won't work.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, what do you think of those debriefing sessions that they often offer first responders after a especially traumatic event?
Okay, so along the years, there's been different models. So there is one that's called a critical incident stress management model, or CISM, and there's some other different ones that are coming out as well. I think that the intention is good. I think that, but again, going back to, we're all individuals. So we all perceive things differently. So just like you said, I might be really upset by a call and my partner might not be bothered at all. Or maybe someone doesn't feel comfortable, speaking in a group. So I think that an invitation to debrief after a call is important. I think that for me, working as a paramedic, I think even if we don't have something that's formally arranged, although that I think that's needed, we do that anyways. So after a bad call, my partner and I might talk about it. Maybe my supervisor might come by and say, hey, how are you doing? Do you need half an hour? Do you need to go and get a coffee and just, get your mind back together? And I think that more services are recognizing that now. I think a lot still needs to be done. But I think you can never force a person to talk about it. I don't think it's good to put a person on the spot in front of their colleagues to talk about, the specifics. I think that can be harmful. I think we need to be very careful, because if we're leading these whatever it might be, these groups or whatever that might be, and giving people information that maybe isn't the proper information, because we're not mental health professionals, sometimes we can hurt people. So I think it is good to talk about it. I think it is good to recognize that some people need some space. But, some people don't have anyone at home. So some services will automatically send you home after a horrible call. And for some people, that's amazing. But for some people, that might be the worst thing, because now they're going home and they're alone.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think beyond just the debriefing, I think that's great, whatever that looks like, if that's immediately after the call or a day or two. But I think it's very important to follow up with the people involved after that. Because if not, I think that it's just, it's almost like lip service. Okay, we've done our job, we've checked the box, and now away you go.
Yeah.
But we need to understand that it might not hit people for a couple of days. It might not hit them for years. So there's a lot more to it, I think, than just, a one-day, one session.
Sure, and I think different people might be hit by different events. Somebody that has experienced a rape herself, for example, might be affected more when she deals with a rape victim. Yes, absolutely. Or if whatever happens on that call somehow reminds you of your personal life, whether it's a vehicle, the age of a child, the color of the hair of the person. It just depends, Yeah, absolutely. And I know when you come to an accident scene, sometimes the scene is very chaotic. You hear screams, and that can be very traumatic by itself, even for bystanders.
Absolutely. And so, with that, then that, is kind of that whole flashback part, right, which is part of PTSD. And, triggers. When we talk about triggers, some people are triggered by things that they see. Some people are triggered by things they hear, or certain smells, or certain locations. So absolutely, all of those things, I had a partner that, we would do very well and an excellent medic. But when you start, and even me to a point, when you start hearing the sounds on a call, that the family, that's what gets you. You know, and that's what got that particular partner was very, very difficult for them. You know, was when you could hear, you know, the crying and the screaming and whatnot in the background. You know, and I'm fortunate that I work with a partner or a number of partners, and you get to know each other, and you can kind of try your best to look out for them. And if something like that's going on, you can kind of try the best you can to get them out of that situation, or find them something different, or you know, or at least know that you need to check in with them after, because they've just been exposed to something that you know is a trigger for that person.
No, that's a good thing to do. That's to offer them the help. I think that's very valuable, and I think it is important even that victims of crime have access to those counseling services or whatever they need, because there's often no money available for those. At least as a first responder, you usually have a healthcare insurance or something that covers those costs. But I know there's victims of crime that have no way to pay for any services, and that's a sad situation then.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that. I forgive me. I'm not from Nova Scotia, although it's a lovely province. I know in Ontario that there's two types of victim services. I think there's a victim witness service and something else. One's run by the police service, the local police service, and then the other one is run by the courts. And so it's fortunate, and again, I don't know how much support, but I am aware that they do have programs out there for people. So people, sexual assault victims, victims of violence, theft, etc., where these victims can go in and receive, all types of counseling. So, but sometimes people don't know that.
That's true.
Or they're told about it when they're traumatized and they don't remember to ask. So
there's services like that in Nova Scotia too, but most of them are run by charities and not even government funded.
Yes.
And they have very limited funds sometimes. And I think sometimes that instead of giving it all to the perpetrators, yes, they need help too, but the victims need support too. And the first responders, by all means, we need our first responders.
Absolutely. That brings me back to peer support. Peer support, the whole concept is, and there's different levels of peer support. So if you're working on, just kind of the level of more of a friendship type of peer support, where basically you're just dealing with people who have been through a similar, maybe not the same, but a similar experience from you. I find that for me, I run a Wings of Change program out here in Ontario, in Brantford, peer support. And basically what it is just trying to normalize things. Yeah. So, I'm a first responder. I have PTSD, or, maybe some mental health issues. And, I have other first responders that come in and frontline workers. And, we talk about basic things like nightmares or, going to Costco on a Saturday when it's very busy and it's just too much for us, and thinking, oh, my goodness, thank goodness, that drives somebody else crazy, too.
And that's very important. I hate to cut you a little bit short, but we are getting slowly to the end of the show, and I would like to give you a chance to share. I know you have a book out there that you wrote. Would you like to share the title so the listeners maybe can get it if they're interested?
Oh, sure. So I have a couple. The first book compilation that I did is called "What's Self-Love Got to Do with That?" Got to do with it. Sorry. You can find that on Amazon.com, or you can also find that on my website, which is simply StefaniSpeaks.com. And Stefanie is SPESANIE. The second book that I took part in is a compilation. It's called Your Shift Matters: Resistance to Resilience. And so those books talk about, a kind of a growth through adversity. Okay, this is the stuff that happened. This is my story. This is what works. This is what didn't work. This is how I stay well. These are some different modalities that I've tried. And it's just a book of encouragement to try and help others, to help them know, hey, you're not alone.
Well, that's amazing. It is really absolute amazing. And I can only recommend everybody that's interested in that topic to get those books and contact you if they're interested, maybe for a speaking gig or something. I know you speak a lot, and that is amazing because you have an amazing story. And I would love to talk to you for hours about that topic. But we are at the end of today's show. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Stefanie. It was a pleasure. Such an important topic.
Thank you.
Please don't hesitate to contact me with any questions, thoughts, comments, or suggestions. Or if you'd like to contact Stefanie, forgot her contact address. My email here is christine@communityradio.ca, or you can contact me through my website, which is docchristine.com. I'm always grateful for any feedback. I also want to extend a special thank you to today's producers, Murray Stacy and Jim Francis. You might not know this, but this is a volunteer-run, non-profit radio station. And we even have an art gallery. So thank you all for listening to Healthy Alternatives. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Sauer. Tune in next Thursday at noon at 97.5 CIOE-FM Community Radio with live stream on communityradio.ca for the next episode. Goodbye and have a great day.